Ladies, as mature women, we've learned that love isn't just about butterflies and fairy tales. We know our worth, and we understand that our time and hearts are precious. Today, I'm sharing 7 early warning signs that a man will break your heart. Subtle red flags that are often dismissed or rationalized away, especially in the excitement of new romance. This isn't about becoming cynical. It's about empowering you with knowledge so you can love wisely and protect your well-being while remaining open to genuine connection. At this stage of life, you don't have decades to recover from heartbreak. You deserve love that enhances your life, not diminishes it. You deserve someone who treats you as the treasure you are. These 7 signs aren't obvious red flags like abuse, those we'd catch immediately. Instead, they're the subtle inconsistencies that make you pause before convincing yourself you're overthinking. Trust your intuition. That little voice telling you something isn't right is usually accurate. Your subconscious picks up patterns your conscious mind might dismiss. As we go through each sign, reflect on your current relationships without judgment. Use this information to move forward with greater awareness and self-protection. Remember, you deserve love that adds value to your days and respects your experience. Never settle for crumbs when you deserve the whole meal. Sign number 1, he's inconsistent with communication. The first warning sign we need to discuss is inconsistent communication, and this one is absolutely crucial for mature women to understand because we often have different expectations and tolerance levels than younger women when it comes to communication patterns. When I say inconsistent communication, I'm not talking about the difference between someone who texts every few hours versus someone who prefers phone calls. I'm talking about erratic patterns that leave you feeling confused, uncertain, and constantly trying to decode his level of interest. Here's what inconsistent communication looks like in practice. He'll text you constantly for 3 days, making you feel like you're the center of his universe. He'll send good morning messages, check in throughout the day, share random thoughts, and keep up engaging conversations. Then suddenly, radio silence for 2 days. No explanation, no heads up, just nothing. Then he reappears as if nothing happened, perhaps with a simple, "Hey, how's your day?" As if the gap never occurred. Or maybe he's the type who calls you every night for a week, and you start to expect and look forward to those calls. They become part of your routine, part of your day's rhythm. Then he doesn't call for 3 nights. And when you finally hear from him, he acts like it's no big deal and offers a vague excuse like work was crazy or I was dealing with some stuff. Now, here's where it gets tricky for us as older women. We often have busy lives ourselves. We have careers, adult children, grandchildren, aging parents, social commitments, and various responsibilities. We understand that life gets hectic, and we don't expect or want someone to be glued to their phone. We're not looking for constant contact or the kind of intense daily communication that might be more common in younger relationships. But, and this is a big but, there's a significant difference between someone who communicates less frequently but consistently and someone who creates an emotional roller coaster with their unpredictable communication patterns. An emotionally mature man who is genuinely interested in building something with you will establish a communication pattern that feels natural and sustainable for both of you. He might say something like, "I usually call in the evenings when I'm winding down, but if something comes up and I can't call, I'll shoot you a quick text to let you know." Or, "I'm not much of a texter during work hours, but I love hearing about your day when I get home." The key is consistency and consideration. He thinks about how his communication patterns affect you, and he cares enough to keep you informed when things change. Inconsistent communication, on the other hand, serves a specific purpose for certain types of men, and it's not a purpose that benefits you. It keeps you in a state of uncertainty, always wondering where you stand. It creates an addictive cycle where the intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable rewards of his attention, actually makes you more attached and more invested than consistent communication would. Think about it this way. If someone called you every day at the same time, you'd appreciate it, but you'd also come to expect it. If someone calls you randomly and unpredictably, those calls become special events that create a bigger emotional impact. It's the same psychological principle that makes gambling addictive, the unpredictable reward schedule. But here's what many women don't realize. Men who are serious about building a genuine relationship don't operate this way. They don't create uncertainty intentionally or unintentionally. They don't disappear without explanation, because they understand that doing so is disrespectful and hurtful. I want to share a story that illustrates this perfectly. I once counseled a woman named Margaret, who was 58 and had been divorced for about 5 years. She met a man through a mutual friend, and initially he seemed wonderful. He was attentive, interesting, and seemed genuinely interested in her life and experiences. For the first few weeks, he texted her every morning and called her every evening. Margaret told me she felt like a teenager again, excited to wake up to his messages and looking forward to their nightly conversations. Then the pattern started to shift. Some days he'd text, some days he wouldn't. Some evenings he'd call, others he'd send a brief text saying he was tied up. Margaret began to analyze everything. If he didn't text in the morning, she'd wonder what she'd said the night before that might have put him off. If he called instead of texting, she'd try to read extra meaning into his choice of communication method. She started adjusting her own behavior, being extra charming when he did make contact, hoping to maintain his interest. The problem wasn't that he was a terrible person or that he was intentionally manipulating her. The problem was that his inconsistent communication revealed something important about his character and his level of emotional maturity. It showed that he didn't consider how his actions affected others, that he was probably juggling multiple interests or priorities and fitting her in when convenient, and that he wasn't operating from a place of genuine intentionality about building a relationship. When Margaret finally addressed this with him directly, his response was telling. He said, "I don't like feeling pressured to communicate on a schedule. I thought you were more laid back than that." Notice how he flipped the script. Suddenly, her reasonable expectation for consistent consideration became her being high maintenance. This is another red flag within the red flag. When you address inconsistent communication, a man who's genuinely interested in you will listen to your concerns and work to find a communication style that works for both of you. A man who's not seriously invested will make you feel like you're being unreasonable for wanting basic courtesy and consideration. So what should you look for instead? Look for a man who communicates with intention and consideration. He doesn't have to contact you every day, but when he does make contact, it feels purposeful and genuine. He doesn't leave you hanging without explanation. If his routine needs to change, he gives you a heads up. For example, an emotionally mature man might say, "I'm going to be in back-to-back meetings all day tomorrow, so I probably won't be able to call until later in the evening. Is that okay?" Or, "I'm going out of town this weekend to visit my son, and I'll be pretty tied up with family stuff, but I'll check in with you when I can." It's about respect, consideration, and emotional maturity. He understands that when you're building a connection with someone, your communication patterns affect their emotions and their sense of security in the budding relationship. Here's another important aspect of this warning sign. Pay attention to how he responds when plans change or when he needs to adjust his communication. Does he apologize for the inconvenience? Does he acknowledge that his change in pattern might affect you? Or does he just assume you'll roll with whatever he decides to do? Also, notice if there's a pattern to his inconsistency. Does he tend to disappear on weekends? Is he less communicative at certain times of the month? Are there specific triggers that cause him to pull back? Sometimes these patterns reveal other issues, like he's still married, he's dating multiple people, or he has commitment issues that cause him to create distance whenever things start to feel too close. As an older woman, you have the wisdom and life experience to recognize that healthy relationships require mutual consideration and respect. You don't need someone who's going to create unnecessary drama or uncertainty in your life through their inconsistent behavior. Trust me on this. If he's inconsistent with communication in the early stages when he should be putting his best foot forward, it will only get worse as time goes on. Early dating behavior is typically someone's best behavior. If his best includes leaving you confused and uncertain about his interest level, imagine what his ordinary behavior will look like. Your time is valuable, your emotional energy is precious, and you deserve someone who recognizes this and treats you accordingly. Don't make excuses for inconsistent communication, and don't convince yourself that you're being too demanding by expecting basic courtesy and consideration. Remember, the right man for you will want to communicate with you. He'll look forward to your conversations, and he'll be thoughtful about how his communication patterns affect your feelings and your sense of security in the relationship. Anything less than that isn't worth your time or emotional investment. Sign number 2, he avoids discussing the future. The second warning sign that a man will break your heart is perhaps one of the most important ones for older women to recognize. He consistently avoids discussing the future, especially any future that includes you in it. Now, I'm not talking about expecting him to discuss marriage on the second date or demanding a 5-year plan after knowing each other for a month. What I'm talking about is a persistent pattern of deflection, discomfort, or complete avoidance whenever conversations naturally turn toward future plans, goals, or the trajectory of your relationship. This warning sign is particularly relevant for mature women because we often approach relationships with a different mindset than our younger counterparts. We're not typically looking to date casually for years while we figure things out. We know what we want, we know what we don't want, and we're generally more interested in building something meaningful than in playing games or keeping our options open indefinitely. Let me paint a picture of what this avoidance looks like in real relationships. You've been dating for a few months, things seem to be going well, and you mention an event that's happening in 6 months. Maybe a wedding you've been invited to, a family reunion, or a special trip you're planning. You casually ask if he'd like to join you, not because you're pressuring him into a long-term commitment, but because it seems natural to include him in your future plans. His response tells you everything you need to know. Does he light up at the idea of being included in your future? Does he check his calendar and seem genuinely interested in being there with you? Or does he suddenly become vague, uncomfortable, and non-committal? Does he say things like, "Oh, that's so far away, let's see how things go," or "I never planned that far ahead," or "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it"? Another version of this might be when you're having natural conversations about your hopes, dreams, and goals. You share something you're excited about. Maybe you're planning to redecorate your home, you're considering a career change, or you're thinking about where you want to travel next. A man who sees you as part of his future will naturally insert himself into these conversations. He'll say things like, "That sounds amazing, I'd love to help you with that," or "I've always wanted to visit there too," or "We should look into that together." But the man who's going to break your heart will listen politely to your plans and then subtly but consistently exclude himself from any future scenarios. He'll be supportive in a distant way, like a friend might be, but he won't naturally envision himself as part of your future experiences. This pattern becomes even more telling when it comes to smaller, nearer-term future planning. You suggest buying tickets to a show that's happening next month, and he hesitates. You mention a restaurant you'd like to try sometime, and he's non-committal. You talk about activities you enjoy and would love to share with him, and he seems interested but never actually follows through with concrete plans. Here's what's particularly heartbreaking about this pattern. It often makes you feel like you're being pushy or demanding when you're actually just behaving normally. You start second-guessing yourself, wondering if you're moving too fast or expecting too much. You might find yourself pulling back on sharing your future plans or dreams because you notice his discomfort and you don't want to scare him away. But let me tell you something important. Sharing your future plans and naturally including someone you're dating in those plans is not pushy or demanding. It's normal and healthy. When someone cares about you and sees potential for a future together, they want to be included in your world, and they want to include you in theirs. I remember working with a client named Sandra, who was 61 and had been widowed for 3 years. She met a man named Robert through a hiking group, and they seemed to have a wonderful connection. Robert was charming, attentive, and seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. They had been dating for about 4 months when Sandra mentioned that her daughter was getting married in 8 months and asked if he'd like to be her date to the wedding. Robert's response was a masterclass in future avoidance. He said, "Oh wow, 8 months is really far away. I mean, who knows what could happen between now and then? I don't like to make plans that far in advance. It makes me feel trapped, you know? Let's just see where we are when it gets closer." Sandra came to me feeling confused and hurt. She said, "I wasn't asking him to marry me. I was just asking if he wanted to go to a wedding with me. Why did that make him so uncomfortable?" The answer is that Robert's discomfort revealed his true intentions and mindset about their relationship. He was enjoying the present moment with Sandra, but he wasn't building toward anything. He wasn't investing in a future with her, and he didn't want to create any expectations or obligations that might limit his freedom to end things whenever he chose. This is a crucial distinction that older women need to understand. There's a significant difference between a man who's naturally cautious about the future because he's been hurt before or because he's learned to take things slowly, and a man who avoids the future because he knows he's not planning to stick around. The cautious man will say things like, "I really want to go to that wedding with you, but I've learned to take things one step at a time. Can we revisit this in a few months when we both have a better sense of where this is heading?" He acknowledges the future, expresses interest in being part of it, but sets a reasonable boundary about his comfort level with long-term planning. The avoidant man, on the other hand, deflects, becomes uncomfortable, and makes you feel like you're being unreasonable for even bringing up future plans. Here's another way this shows up: in conversations about life goals and values. When you share your dreams, hopes, and plans, does he engage with them meaningfully? Does he ask questions, show genuine interest, and share his own goals and dreams? Or does he listen politely, but remain mysteriously vague about his own future plans? A man who's serious about building something with you will naturally want to understand your goals and dreams because he's trying to figure out how his life might align with yours. He'll share his own plans and aspirations because he wants you to understand what a future with him might look like. But the man who's going to break your heart keeps his future plans deliberately vague because he doesn't want to mislead you, but he also doesn't want to lose the benefits of your companionship right now. He's essentially having his cake and eating it too, enjoying the relationship without taking on any responsibility for your emotional investment in it. This pattern often extends to practical matters as well. He's hesitant to introduce you to important people in his life because that would signal that he sees you as a lasting part of his world. He's reluctant to leave personal items at your place or to give you a key, even when it would be convenient and practical. He keeps the relationship in a holding pattern where you're more than casual acquaintances, but less than serious partners. What makes this particularly challenging for older women is that we often interpret this behavior more charitably than we should. We might think, he's been hurt before, so he's just being careful, or he's learned not to rush into things, or he's more mature and realistic about not making promises he can't keep. While these interpretations might sometimes be accurate, more often than not, future avoidance is simply a sign that he's not as invested in the relationship as you are. and he's keeping his options open. So what should you look for instead? Look for a man who naturally and comfortably includes you in his future thinking. He doesn't have to have everything figured out, and he doesn't have to make unrealistic promises, but he should be able to envision you in his life going forward. He'll say things like, "I can't wait for you to meet my daughter when she visits next month," or "I've been thinking it would be fun to plan a little getaway together sometime," or "There's this concert series that happens every summer that I think you'd really enjoy." He'll ask questions about your future plans, not because he's nosy, but because he's genuinely interested in understanding what's important to you and how he might fit into your world. He'll share his own hopes and dreams because he wants you to understand what a future with him might look like. The key is that these conversations feel natural and comfortable, not forced or anxiety-provoking. When someone sees you as part of their future, talking about the future feels exciting and hopeful, not scary and overwhelming. Remember, as an older woman, your time is precious. You don't have decades to spend in a relationship that's going nowhere. You deserve someone who's not just enjoying the present moment with you, but who's actively building toward a future together. Don't let anyone keep you in relationship limbo while they decide whether you're worth their long-term investment. If a man consistently avoids discussing the future, believe what his behavior is telling you, not what you hope it might mean. Your heart is too valuable to waste on someone who can't or won't envision you in their tomorrow. Sign number 3, he's selectively vulnerable. The third warning sign that a man will break your heart is one that can be particularly confusing and emotionally manipulative: selective vulnerability. This is when a man shares deeply personal information with you. His fears, past hurts, family struggles, or emotional wounds, but only in ways that serve his purposes rather than creating genuine intimacy. This warning sign is especially important for older women to understand because we often value emotional depth and authentic connection above the surface-level charm that might have attracted us when we were younger. We've lived long enough to know that real love requires vulnerability, honesty, and emotional intimacy. So when a man opens up to us, shares his struggles, and shows us his emotional side, we naturally interpret this as a sign that he trusts us and is building a genuine connection. But here's what selective vulnerability actually looks like and why it's so dangerous to your emotional well-being. The selectively vulnerable man will share his past traumas, but only to excuse his current bad behavior. He'll tell you about his difficult childhood to explain why he has trouble with commitment. He'll share stories about his ex-wife's betrayal to justify his trust issues. He'll open up about his financial struggles to explain why he can't contribute equally to dates or activities. He'll discuss his mental health challenges to excuse his inconsistent behavior or emotional unavailability. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not suggesting that men shouldn't share their past traumas or current struggles. Healthy relationships absolutely require both partners to be open about their histories, their challenges, and their areas of growth. The difference lies in how this vulnerability is used and what purpose it serves. Genuine vulnerability is about creating connection and building trust. It's about saying, "This is who I am, including my flaws and struggles, and I want you to know me fully." It comes with accountability, growth mindset, and often evidence of work being done to address past issues. Selective vulnerability, on the other hand, is about creating sympathy and avoiding accountability. It's about saying, "This is why I am the way I am, and you should accept my limitations without expecting me to change or grow." Let me give you some specific examples to illustrate this difference. Genuine vulnerability sounds like, "I went through a really difficult divorce 5 years ago, and it made me realize I had some unhealthy communication patterns. I've been working with a therapist to understand my role in what went wrong and to develop better relationship skills. Sometimes I still catch myself falling into old habits, but I'm committed to doing better." Selective vulnerability sounds like, "My ex-wife really did a number on me. She cheated, took half my money, and turned my kids against me. I don't think I'll ever be able to trust anyone completely again. I know it's not fair to you, but I can't help how I feel. Do you see the difference? The first example includes acknowledgement of personal responsibility, evidence of growth work, and commitment to change. The second example positions the man as a victim, absolves him of responsibility for his current behavior, and essentially warns you that he's not planning to work on his issues. Another way selective vulnerability shows up is through what I call trauma dumping. This is when a man shares extremely personal, painful experiences very early in the relationship, often in inappropriate settings, or without giving you the choice to consent to hearing such heavy information. I once counseled a woman named Elena, who was 55 and had been dating a man named Marcus for about 6 weeks. On their fourth date, over dinner at a nice restaurant, Marcus suddenly began telling her about his childhood sexual abuse, his father's alcoholism, and his brother's suicide. Eleanor felt honored that he trusted her with such personal information, but she also felt overwhelmed and unsure how to respond appropriately in that setting. What Elena later realized was that Marcus's sharing wasn't really about trust or building intimacy. It was about creating a sense of obligation and emotional debt. By sharing such traumatic information, he made Elena feel like she couldn't possibly end things with him or set boundaries because he had been so vulnerable with her. This is emotional manipulation, even if it's not conscious or intentional. It puts the woman in a position where she feels responsible for the man's emotional well-being and guilty for having any negative reactions to his behavior. Here's another form of selective vulnerability: the man who shares his struggles but never asks about yours. He'll tell you all about his difficult day, his work stress, his family drama, or his health concerns, but he rarely inquires about your challenges or offers support for your difficulties. This isn't vulnerability. It's emotional self-centeredness, disguised as openness. True emotional intimacy is reciprocal. It involves both sharing and receiving, both being vulnerable and holding space for someone else's vulnerability. If a man is constantly in the role of the one being supported, but never in the role of providing support, that's a significant red flag. There's also the pattern of strategic vulnerability, sharing personal information to get what he wants in the moment. He might open up about feeling lonely when he wants physical intimacy. He might share his financial stress when he wants you to pay for something. He might discuss his emotional struggles when he wants you to be more patient with his bad behavior. Again, the key difference is timing and purpose. Genuine sharing happens naturally as part of building connection. Strategic sharing happens when he needs something from you. One of the most insidious forms of selective vulnerability is when a man shares his awareness of his own red flags, but frames it as self-awareness rather than as a warning. He'll say things like, "I know I have commitment issues," or "I'm aware that I tend to pull away when things get serious," or "I've been told I'm emotionally unavailable, and I guess that's probably true." Women often interpret this kind of self-awareness as a positive sign. We think, at least he knows his issues, which means he can work on them, but more often than not, this is actually a form of preemptive defense. He's telling you about his limitations, not because he plans to change them, but because he wants to be able to say later, "I warned you about this." It's like someone saying, "I'm probably going to hurt you," and then expecting you to have no right to be upset when they do exactly that. It's a way of absolving himself of responsibility while still getting the benefits of your emotional investment. So what does healthy vulnerability look like? Healthy vulnerability is gradual, appropriate, and reciprocal. It includes taking responsibility for one's actions and showing evidence of growth and self-work. It creates connection rather than obligation, and it invites reciprocal sharing rather than demanding caretaking. An emotionally healthy man will share his struggles in the context of how he's working to overcome them. He'll be interested in your experiences and challenges, not just focused on his own. He'll respect appropriate boundaries about timing and setting for heavy conversations. And he won't use his past traumas as excuses for current bad behavior. For lay example, a healthy man might say, "I want you to know that I struggled with depression a few years ago after my divorce. It was a really dark time for me, but I got help, and I've learned a lot about managing my mental health. I'm in a much better place now, but I wanted you to be aware of it because it's part of my story." Or he might say, "I've realized that I tend to get overwhelmed when relationships move quickly, probably because of some trust issues from my past. I'm working on this with my therapist, but I wanted you to know in case I seem to need more time to process things sometimes. Please, don't take it personally, it's my stuff to work through." The difference is accountability, growth orientation, and consideration for your emotional well-being, not just his own. As an older woman, you have the wisdom to recognize that everyone has baggage and everyone has areas where they need to grow. You're not looking for perfection, but you should be looking for someone who takes responsibility for their issues and is actively working to address them, not someone who uses their issues as excuses or who expects you to be their unpaid therapist. Remember, vulnerability should bring you closer together, not create an unequal dynamic where you're constantly walking on eggshells around his emotional triggers or feeling responsible for managing his psychological well-being. Real intimacy involves mutual support, not one-sided caretaking. Trust your instincts. If his vulnerability feels manipulative, overwhelming, or one-sided, it probably is. You deserve someone whose openness creates genuine connection and mutual understanding, not someone who uses emotional sharing as a tool to get what he wants or to avoid accountability for his actions. Sign number 4. He keeps you separate from his real life. The fourth warning sign that a man will break your heart is one that many older women overlook or rationalize away. He keeps you separate from his real life. This means that despite months of dating, you remain isolated from his friends, family, work colleagues, and the people and activities that make up his everyday world. This warning sign is particularly important for mature women to recognize because we often have different expectations about social integration than younger women might. We understand that everyone values their privacy, that blending social circles takes time, and that not every relationship needs to involve immediate integration into each other's lives. We're often more independent and less likely to expect or demand instant inclusion in every aspect of a partner's world. However, there's a significant difference between taking things slowly and deliberately keeping someone separate from your real life. And understanding this difference could save you months or even years of emotional investment in someone who never intended to make you a genuine part of their world. Let me paint a picture of what this separation looks like in practice. You've been dating for several months, maybe even close to a year. You spend time together regularly, perhaps even staying overnight at each other's homes. You have great conversations, shared interests, and what feels like genuine intimacy. But when you step back and really examine the relationship, you realize that you exist in a complete bubble, separate from everything else in his life. You've never met his friends, despite hearing stories about them regularly. When he talks about weekend activities with his buddies, you're never invited. If he mentions grabbing drinks with colleagues after work, it never occurs to him to include you, even casually. When his adult children visit or call, you're either not there or you're introduced as a friend, if at all. Perhaps most tellingly, when you're out together in public, especially in areas where he might encounter people he knows, he seems uncomfortable or anxious. He doesn't introduce you enthusiastically as his girlfriend or partner. Instead, you might notice him steering you away from certain restaurants or venues, or seeming relieved when you don't run into anyone from his social circle. Now, I want to address the rationalizations that many women make when they notice this pattern, because I've heard them all in my practice, and I've probably made some of them myself at various points in my life. He's just private. This is probably the most common excuse. Yes, Some people are naturally more private than others, but there's a difference between being discreet and being secretive. A private person might not blast his relationship status on social media or bring you to every social event, but he doesn't actively hide your existence from the important people in his life. He's protecting me from his complicated family. This sounds thoughtful and caring, doesn't it? He doesn't want to subject you to his difficult relatives or messy family dynamics. But here's the thing. If he's serious about building a life with you, you're going to encounter those complicated family members eventually. Protecting you from them indefinitely isn't realistic or fair to your relationship. We're taking things slow. Taking things slow in terms of physical intimacy or major commitments is healthy and wise. But taking things slow shouldn't mean keeping you completely separate from his social world for months on end. Integration into each other's lives should be gradual but consistent. He's been hurt before and doesn't want to introduce someone to his kids, friends, family until he's sure. This sounds reasonable, and for someone with young children, extra caution about introductions makes perfect sense. But if he has adult children, or if you're talking about meeting friends rather than family members, this excuse starts to wear thin after a reasonable period of dating. Let me share a story that illustrates how devastating this pattern can be. I worked with a client named Joyce, who was 62 and had been divorced for 7 years. She met David through an online dating site, and they seemed to have a wonderful connection. David was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in building a relationship with her. They dated for almost a year. David would come to her house for dinner. They'd go out to restaurants, usually in towns 30-40 minutes away from where he lived, and they'd spend intimate weekends together. Joyce felt like they were building something real and meaningful. But as time went on, Joyce began to notice some troubling patterns. She had never met any of David's friends, despite his frequent stories about his social activities. She had never been to his house, always meeting at hers or at neutral locations. When she asked about meeting his adult daughter, he said he wanted to wait until he was absolutely certain about their future. The breaking point came when Joyce ran into David at a local grocery store while she was shopping with her sister. David was with a woman Joyce had never seen before, and when he spotted Joyce, his face went white. He awkwardly introduced the women to each other, the other woman as his friend Sarah, and Joyce as his friend Joyce. No mention of dating, relationships, or the fact that Joyce thought she was his girlfriend. Later, when Joyce confronted David about the incident, the truth came out. Sarah wasn't just a friend, she was someone else he'd been dating for about 6 months. David had been maintaining separate relationships with multiple women, keeping each one isolated from his real life so that his deception could continue undetected. Now, not every man who keeps you separate from his life is necessarily dating multiple people, but the compartmentalization serves similar purposes. It allows him to maintain control over the relationship narrative. It prevents you from getting a full picture of who he really is, and it makes it easier for him to end things without complications. Here's another way this shows up: resistance to public displays of your relationship. He's affectionate and attentive when you're alone or in settings where he's unlikely to encounter people he knows. But in public, especially in his hometown or neighborhood, he becomes distant or uncomfortable with physical affection. He doesn't hold your hand. He walks separately from you, and he seems anxious about being seen together. This behavior sends a clear message. He doesn't want to be publicly associated with you as his romantic partner. And that should tell you everything you need to know about his intentions and his level of commitment to your relationship. There's also the digital separation to consider. In today's world, social media presence is a part of most people's social lives. While not everyone is active on social platforms and privacy preferences vary widely, it's worth noting if he's active on social media, but you're completely absent from his online presence. No pictures together, no check-ins at places you've visited, No acknowledgement of your existence in his digital world. Again, not everyone needs to broadcast their relationship online, but complete digital invisibility, especially combined with other forms of separation, is worth noting. So what should healthy integration look like? In a genuine relationship, integration happens gradually but consistently. After a few months of dating, you should start meeting some of his friends in casual settings. He should be introducing you as his girlfriend or partner, not as a friend. He should include you in some of his regular social activities, and he should seem proud and comfortable having you in his social circle. With family, the timeline might be longer and should respect both of your comfort levels, especially when children are involved. But there should be movement toward integration, not indefinite separation. He should be interested in integrating you into his world, and he should be equally interested in being integrated into yours. He should want to meet your friends and family, participate in your social activities, and become a genuine part of your life, not just someone you see in isolation. Most importantly, he should be proud to be with you. He should want people to know about you, to meet you, and to see what you mean to him. If he's keeping you hidden, he's either not serious about your relationship or there's something about his situation that he doesn't want you to discover. An older woman, you deserve to be with someone who's excited to have you as part of their life, not someone who compartmentalizes you into a separate category. You deserve to build a life together, which means becoming part of each other's existing lives, not just creating an isolated bubble where your relationship exists apart from everything else. If you've been dating someone for several months and you're still completely separate from his real world, it's time to have an honest conversation about what that means and where the relationship is heading. Don't let anyone keep you in relationship purgatory while they decide whether you're worth integrating into their actual life. Your time, your heart, and your emotional investment deserve someone who's proud to have you and excited to blend your lives together. Don't settle for being someone's secret or side story when you deserve to be a central character in their life narrative. Sign number 5, he's inconsistent with effort. The 5th warning sign that a man will break your heart is inconsistent effort, and this one is particularly heartbreaking because it creates a cycle of hope and disappointment that can keep you emotionally hooked for months or even years. Inconsistent effort means that his investment in the relationship, the time, energy, attention, and care he puts into building something with you, fluctuates dramatically without clear reason or explanation. One week he's planning thoughtful dates, remembering details about your life, and making you feel like the most important person in his world. The next week, you're lucky to get a text back, and you feel like you're bothering him by expecting the same level of engagement you've come to anticipate. This pattern is especially damaging for older women because we often have a lower tolerance for games and inconsistency, but we also tend to give people the benefit of the doubt when they show us glimpses of their best selves. We think, I know he's capable of being attentive and thoughtful because I've seen him do it. So if he's not doing it now, there must be a good reason. But here's what I've learned through years of counseling women and through my own experiences. When someone shows you inconsistent effort, they're showing you exactly how much they're willing to invest in you, and it's not enough. Let me describe what inconsistent effort looks like in practice, because it can be subtle and confusing, especially when you're emotionally invested in the relationship. In the beginning, he might be incredibly attentive. He plans creative dates, remembers your preferences, asks thoughtful questions about your life, and seems genuinely interested in getting to know you. He calls when he says he will, follows through on plans, and makes you feel valued and appreciated. You think, finally, a mature man who knows how to treat a woman. Then gradually, or sometimes suddenly, the effort level drops. The elaborate dates become casual hangouts. The thoughtful gestures become rare. He stops asking about your day or remembering important things you've told him. Plans become last-minute and convenience-based. You find yourself doing more of the emotional labor in the relationship, initiating conversations, making plans, and trying to maintain the connection. But just when you start to pull back or question what's happening, he ramps up the effort again. Maybe he plans a special evening, buys you a thoughtful gift, or has one of those deep, meaningful conversations that reminded you why you fell for him in the beginning. You think, see, I knew the real him was still there. Maybe he was just going through a rough patch. This cycle of high effort, followed by low effort, followed by high effort again, creates what psychologists call an intermittent reinforcement schedule. It's the same principle that makes gambling addictive. The unpredictable rewards create a much stronger psychological attachment than consistent rewards would. Here's a specific example that illustrates this pattern perfectly. I once worked with a client named Patricia who was 59 and had been dating a man named Thomas for about 8 months. In the early weeks of their relationship, Thomas was incredibly romantic. He brought her flowers, planned weekend getaways, sent her sweet text messages throughout the day, and seemed to put genuine thought into making her happy. After about 2 months, his effort level began to decline. The flowers stopped coming, the weekend getaways became rare, the sweet text messages dwindled to basic check-ins. Patricia felt the shift but didn't want to seem demanding, so she didn't say anything initially. Then, just as Patricia was starting to seriously question the relationship, Thomas planned an elaborate surprise for her birthday. A dinner at her favorite restaurant, tickets to a show she'd mentioned wanting to see, and a beautiful piece of jewelry. Patricia was over the moon. She thought, I was wrong to doubt him. He really does care about me. But within a few weeks, Thomas was back to minimal effort. Patricia found herself constantly confused and off balance, never knowing which version of Thomas she was going to get, the romantic, attentive one or the distant, low-effort one. What Patricia eventually realized was that Thomas's high-effort periods weren't genuine expressions of his feelings for her. They were strategic interventions that happened whenever he sensed she might be pulling away or losing interest. He would put in just enough effort to reel her back in, then return to his default level of minimal investment. This pattern is particularly insidious because it makes you question your own perceptions and standards. You start to think, maybe I'm being too demanding. Maybe I should be grateful for the good times and not focus on the low-effort periods. Maybe this is just how relationships work. They have ups and downs. But healthy relationships don't work this way. In a genuine partnership, effort levels might fluctuate based on life circumstances, work stress, family issues, health concerns, or other legitimate factors. But the baseline level of care, consideration, and investment remains relatively consistent. More importantly, when effort levels do drop due to external circumstances, a caring partner communicates about what's happening and makes an effort to maintain connection despite the challenges. Another way inconsistent effort shows up is in the details. He might remember to call you every day for 2 weeks, then forget to call for 3 days without explanation. He might be very attentive to your preferences and needs during some interactions, then seem completely oblivious to them during others. For example, maybe he usually asks about your work or your family, showing genuine interest in your life. Then suddenly, he becomes self-focused and doesn't ask about your day or seem interested in your experiences. When you try to share something important, he's distracted or gives you minimal responses, or perhaps he's usually punctual and reliable, then starts showing up late, cancelling plans at the last minute, or forgetting about commitments he's made to you. When you express frustration, he apologizes and returns to being reliable for a while, only to repeat the pattern later. The effect of this inconsistency is profound and damaging. It keeps you in a constant state of uncertainty about where you stand and how much you mean to him. You find yourself working harder to earn his high effort periods, essentially training yourself to accept minimal effort as normal and to be grateful for basic consideration when it appears. This is especially problematic for older women who may have spent years in marriages or relationships where we learn to manage and accommodate someone else's moods and effort levels. We might have developed the skill of reading subtle signals and adjusting our expectations accordingly. While these skills served us in the past, they can work against us in new relationships if they prevent us from recognizing and addressing unacceptable patterns. Here's what consistent, healthy effort looks like. A man who's genuinely invested in building a relationship with you maintains a steady baseline of care, attention, and investment. This doesn't mean every day is perfect, or that he never has off days. It means that his overall pattern of behavior shows consistent consideration for your feelings, reliable follow-through on commitments, and sustained interest in your life and well-being. When life circumstances affect his ability to give his usual level of attention, he communicates about it. He says something like, "I'm dealing with a work crisis this week, so I might be a bit distracted, but I want you to know it's not about you," or "My mom is having health issues, and I need to focus on that for the next few days, but I'll check in with you." He doesn't use external stressors as excuses to treat you poorly or to withdraw his emotional investment. Instead, he finds ways to maintain connection even when he's dealing with challenges. Most importantly, his effort doesn't depend on your behavior or on whether he senses you pulling away. He doesn't ramp up his investment only when he thinks he might lose you. His care and attention are consistent because they're based on his genuine feelings for you, not on a strategic calculation about how much effort he needs to expend to keep you interested. I want to share another story that illustrates the difference between temporary life challenges and genuine inconsistent effort. Another client, Maria, was dating a man named Frank who was going through a difficult time with his elderly father's declining health. During this period, Frank was often preoccupied and sometimes couldn't give Maria his full attention. But here's what Frank did differently. He communicated clearly about what was happening. He said, "Maria, I want you to know that my dad's health is really weighing on me right now. I might seem distracted or need to cancel plans occasionally, but it has nothing to do with my feelings for you. I really appreciate your understanding during this difficult time." Frank also made specific efforts to maintain their connection despite his stress. He might send brief text messages saying, "Thinking of you, even though I'm dealing with dad stuff." He would schedule specific times to focus on Maria, putting his phone away and giving her his full attention. When they were together, he made an effort to be present and engaged, not just physically there, but emotionally available. The key difference was communication, consistency of character, and continued emotional investment even during difficult circumstances. Frank's reduced availability was situation-specific and temporary, not a reflection of his feelings about Maria or his commitment to their relationship. As an older woman, you have the wisdom to recognize that life is complicated and that everyone goes through challenging periods that affect their ability to give their best to a relationship. But you also have the right to expect that someone who cares about you will communicate about these challenges and make efforts to maintain connection even during difficult times. You deserve someone whose effort level reflects their genuine investment in you, not someone who uses effort as a tool to manage your expectations and keep you hooked. Don't accept inconsistent effort as normal, and don't make excuses for someone who only treats you well when they sense you might leave. Your heart, your time, and your emotional energy deserve someone who shows up consistently, not just when it's convenient or strategic for them to do so. Sign number 6. He doesn't invest in understanding you. The sixth warning sign that a man will break your heart is perhaps one of the most subtle yet devastating. He doesn't invest in truly understanding you. This isn't about him not liking your interests or not agreeing with your opinions. This is about a fundamental lack of curiosity about who you are as a person, what makes you tick, and what matters most to your heart and soul. This warning sign is particularly important for older women to recognize because by this stage in our lives, we've developed rich, complex inner worlds. We have decades of experiences, carefully formed values, nuanced perspectives, and deep emotional landscapes. We've learned what brings us joy, what causes us pain, and what we need to feel truly seen and appreciated. We're not the same person. We were at 25 or 35, and we shouldn't have to pretend to be simpler or less complex than we are to make someone else comfortable. A man who doesn't invest in understanding you might seem perfectly pleasant on the surface. He might be charming, fun to be around, and easy to talk to. But when you really examine your conversations and interactions, you realize that they rarely go beneath the surface level. Let me paint a picture of what this looks like in practice. You share something important about your past, perhaps a formative experience, a significant loss, or a major life change, and his response is polite, but shallow. He doesn't ask follow-up questions that show he's trying to understand how that experience shaped you. He doesn't reference it later in ways that show he's been thinking about what you shared. It's as if your deeper revelations go into a black hole of polite acknowledgement, but don't actually land anywhere meaningful. Or maybe you express excitement about something you're passionate about, your work, a hobby, a cause you care about, or a personal goal you're pursuing. His response is supportive in a generic way, but he doesn't show genuine curiosity about why this matters to you or what it means in the context of your life. He says things like, "That's great," or "Good for you," but he doesn't ask the kinds of questions that would help him understand your passion or how he might support or engage with it. I remember working with a client named Helen who was 64 and had been dating a man named Paul for about 6 months. Helen was an accomplished artist who had been painting for over 30 years. Her art wasn't just a hobby. It was a fundamental part of who she was, how she processed the world, and how she found meaning and joy in life. Paul would often compliment Helen's paintings when he visited her studio, saying things like, "These are really beautiful," or "You're so talented." On the surface, this seemed supportive. But Helen began to notice that Paul never asked about her creative process, never inquired about what inspired a particular piece, and never showed interest in understanding what art meant to her as a person. When Helen tried to share her excitement about a new technique she was exploring or a gallery opportunity she was pursuing, Paul would listen politely but then quickly change the subject to something else. He never asked to accompany her to art openings or exhibitions, never suggested visiting museums together, and never engaged with her artistic world in any meaningful way. What Helen eventually realized was that Paul saw her painting as Helen's hobby, rather than as a window into understanding who she was as a person. He didn't recognize that her artistic expression was intimately connected to her values, her worldview, her emotional life, and her sense of purpose. By failing to engage with this crucial part of her identity, he was essentially telling her that he wasn't interested in knowing her on a deeper level. This pattern extends to all areas of a woman's life. Maybe you have strong political or social views that stem from your life experiences and values. A man who doesn't invest in understanding you might dismiss these as Helen's politics without trying to understand how your perspectives were formed, or why they matter to you. Perhaps you have close relationships with your adult children or grandchildren that bring you tremendous joy and sometimes cause you worry. He might acknowledge these relationships superficially, but never ask the kinds of questions that would help him understand your role as a mother or grandmother, or how these relationships affect your emotional world. Or maybe you have spiritual beliefs or practices that provide comfort and guidance in your life. He might be respectful of your beliefs without showing any curiosity about how they developed, what they mean to you, or how they influence your daily life and decision-making. The result of this lack of investment in understanding you is a relationship that feels hollow despite being pleasant on the surface. You might enjoy his company and appreciate his good qualities, but you feel fundamentally unseen and unknown. You sense that he's in love with a version of you that exists in his mind, a simplified, edited version that doesn't include the full depth and complexity of who you really are. This is particularly painful for older women because we've reached a stage in life where we know ourselves well and value authentic connection above superficial charm. We don't want to hide parts of ourselves or pretend to be simpler than we are. We want to be loved for our whole selves, including our complexities, contradictions, and depth. Here's another way this shows up. He doesn't remember or reference things that are important to you. You might tell him about a medical appointment you're nervous about, and he doesn't follow up to ask how it went. You might share your excitement about a visit from an old friend, and he doesn't remember to ask about it afterward. You might mention that you're dealing with a challenging situation at work, and he doesn't check in to see how things are progressing. This isn't about having a perfect memory. We all forget things sometimes. This is about a pattern of not retaining or following up on information that matters to your emotional world. It suggests that your inner life isn't important enough to him to warrant his sustained attention and engagement. There's also the phenomenon of surface-level questioning. He might ask about your day, but his questions are generic and don't drill down into what actually matters to you. He says, "How was your day?" but doesn't ask about the specific things he knows are important in your life. He doesn't remember that Tuesdays are when you volunteer at the library, or that you've been worried about your sister's health, or that you've been excited about a project you're working on. A man who's genuinely invested in understanding you asks specific questions based on what he knows about your life. He says things like, "How did the volunteer training go today?" Or, "Did you hear back from your sister about her test results?" Or, "How's that photography project coming along?" The difference between generic interest and specific investment is profound. Generic interest is polite and pleasant, but ultimately superficial. Specific investment shows that he's been thinking about you, remembering what matters to you, and genuinely caring about your experiences. Here's what genuine investment in understanding you looks like. He asks follow-up questions when you share something important. He references previous conversations in ways that show he's been thinking about what you've told him. He shows curiosity about your perspectives, your experiences, and your inner world. He wants to understand not just what you think, but why you think it and how your thoughts and feelings developed. He pays attention to patterns in your behavior and emotions. He notices when you're stressed, excited, worried, or happy, and he asks about it. He learns your rhythms, your preferences, and your needs. He understands what energizes you and what drains you. He knows what makes you laugh and what makes you feel secure. Most importantly, he uses this understanding to love you better. He applies what he learns about you to how he treats you, how he supports you, and how he builds a life with you. Understanding you isn't just an intellectual exercise for him, it's how he becomes a better partner to you. I want to share a contrasting story that illustrates what this investment looks like. Another client, Barbara, was dating a man named Richard who showed genuine curiosity about who she was as a person. Barbara had been a teacher for 35 years before retiring, and education remained a passion of hers even in retirement. Richard didn't just acknowledge Barbara's background in education. He asked thoughtful questions about it. He wanted to know what grade levels she'd taught, what changes she'd witnessed in education over her career, what she'd loved most about teaching, and what she missed most about it. When Barbara mentioned educational issues in the news, Richard would ask for her perspective, genuinely valuing her expertise and experience. Richard also noticed that Barbara lit up when she talked about her former students, so he encouraged her to share stories about memorable students or teaching moments. He understood that teaching wasn't just Barbara's former job, it was a fundamental part of her identity and values. This understanding influenced how Richard supported Barbara. When she expressed interest in tutoring opportunities, he helped her research local programs. When she worried about the state of education, he listened thoughtfully and asked questions that helped her process her concerns. He saw her educational background as a treasure trove of wisdom and experience, not just a fact about her past. The result was that Barbara felt truly seen and appreciated for who she was. Richard wasn't just dating a retired teacher. He was dating Barbara, a woman whose decades of dedication to education had shaped her into someone with deep empathy, strong values, and valuable insights about human development and learning. An older woman, you deserve this level of understanding and investment. You deserve someone who's fascinated by your complexity, curious about your experiences, and committed to knowing you deeply. You've lived too much and learned too much to settle for someone who's content to know only the surface version of who you are. If you're with someone who doesn't invest in understanding you, it's not because you're too complex or difficult to understand. It's because he's not putting in the effort required to truly know you, and that says everything you need to know about his level of investment in your relationship. Don't shrink yourself to make it easier for someone to get you. The right person for you will want to understand your depth, not ask you to become shallow. Sign number 7. He doesn't prioritize your feelings. The 7th and final warning sign that a man will break your heart is perhaps the most damaging of all. He doesn't prioritize your feelings. This doesn't mean he's intentionally cruel or that he never considers your emotions. Instead, it means that when there's a conflict between his convenience, preferences or desires and your emotional well-being, he consistently chooses his own needs over yours. This warning sign is particularly devastating for older women because we've often spent decades learning to minimize our own needs, accommodate others, and manage our emotional responses to keep peace in relationships. We may have been conditioned to believe that being low maintenance or understanding makes us more lovable. So when a man doesn't prioritize our feelings, we often blame ourselves for being too sensitive rather than recognizing that his behavior is the problem. But here's what I want every woman watching this to understand. Your feelings matter. They matter just as much as his feelings. They matter just as much as his convenience. And any man who's worthy of your love will understand this and act accordingly. Let me show you what it looks like when a man doesn't prioritize your feelings, because it can be subtle and gradually erosive rather than obviously harmful. He makes plans that suit his schedule without considering yours, then gets irritated when you express that the timing doesn't work for you. When you explain that his last-minute changes cause you stress or disappointment, he responds with something like, "I thought you were more flexible than that," or "It's not that big of a deal." Notice what's happening here. He's not just dismissing your schedule. He's dismissing your emotional response to his inconsideration. He's suggesting that your feelings about being treated inconsiderately are the problem, not his inconsiderate behavior. Or perhaps he says things that hurt your feelings, maybe making jokes at your expense, dismissing your concerns, or making casual comments that sting. When you tell him that his words were hurtful, instead of apologizing and adjusting his behavior, he deflects responsibility. He says things like, "I was just kidding, don't be so sensitive," or, I didn't mean it that way," or "I can't walk on eggshells around you." Again, notice the pattern. He's making your emotional response to his hurtful behavior the problem, rather than taking responsibility for the impact of his actions. This pattern extends to bigger issues as well. Maybe you've expressed that you need more quality time together, and instead of working with you to find solutions, he makes you feel demanding for having that need. Perhaps you've shared that certain behaviors make you feel insecure or uncomfortable, and instead of addressing those behaviors, he makes you feel like your insecurity is your problem to solve alone. I want to share a particularly heartbreaking example from my practice. I worked with a client named Ruth who was 67 and had been dating a man named Gary for about a year. Ruth had been widowed 5 years earlier after a long, happy marriage, and Gary was her first serious relationship since her husband's death. Gary knew that certain dates were emotionally difficult for Ruth: her wedding anniversary, her husband's birthday, and the anniversary of his death. These weren't secret struggles. Ruth had been open about the fact that while she was ready to love again, these dates still brought up grief and sadness. The first time her wedding anniversary approached, after they'd been dating, Ruth mentioned to Gary that she might be a bit emotional around that time. She explained that she usually spent the day quietly, maybe visiting her husband's grave or looking through old photos, and that she'd probably prefer to have a low-key evening rather than anything elaborate. Gary's response was telling. He said, "I don't understand why you need to dwell on the past. You're with me now. Shouldn't that be enough to make you happy?" When the day actually arrived and Ruth was indeed feeling sad and reflective, Gary became impatient and distant. He made comments like, "I thought you were over this and you're choosing to be sad." When Ruth tried to explain that grief isn't something you get over, but something you learn to carry, Gary responded with frustration rather than compassion. What Gary was essentially telling Ruth was that her feelings were inconvenient for him, and therefore she should stop having them. He wanted the benefits of being with a mature woman who had depth of experience, but he didn't want to deal with the emotional complexity that comes with that depth. This is a perfect example of not prioritizing someone's feelings. Gary wasn't being intentionally cruel, but he was making it clear that his comfort and convenience were more important than Ruth's emotional well-being. Here's another way this shows up. He makes unilateral decisions that affect you without considering your input or feelings. Maybe he decides to change vacation plans you've made together without discussing it with you first. Or he commits to social activities that involve you without asking if you're available or interested. When you express frustration about not being consulted, he dismisses your concerns as nitpicking or controlling. The message is clear. He doesn't see you as an equal partner whose feelings and preferences deserve consideration. You're expected to adapt to his decisions and be grateful for whatever level of consideration he chooses to give you. There's also the pattern of emotional dismissiveness. When you're upset about something, whether it's related to him or to other aspects of your life, he shows impatience or annoyance rather than concern and support. He might say things like, "Why are you letting this bother you so much?" Or, "You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." Or, "I don't know why you're so upset about this." These responses send a clear message. Your emotional responses are burdensome to him, and he wishes you would just stop having feelings that require his attention or care. This is particularly damaging for older women because we've often learned to be more emotionally self-sufficient than younger women. We may not cry easily or frequently, we may not be dramatically emotional, and we may have developed good coping skills for life's challenges. So when we do express that something is bothering us or that we need emotional support, it's usually because something is genuinely significant. A man who doesn't prioritize your feelings will miss or dismiss these relatively rare requests for emotional attention, sending the message that even your most reasonable emotional needs are too much for him to handle. Here's what it looks like when someone does prioritize your feelings. When you express that something is bothering you, his first response is concern and curiosity, not defensiveness or dismissal. He asks questions to understand what you're experiencing and why. He looks for ways to support you or to adjust his behavior if he's contributed to the problem. When there's a conflict between his preferences and your emotional well-being, he doesn't automatically assume his needs take precedence. He looks for solutions that consider both of your needs, and when compromise isn't possible, he's willing to put your emotional well-being first sometimes. He pays attention to what affects your emotions and remembers what matters to you. If he knows certain situations are stressful for you, he offers extra support during those times. If he knows certain behaviors upset you, he makes an effort to avoid those behaviors. Most importantly, he never makes you feel bad for having feelings. He understands that emotions are information, not inconveniences, and that caring about your emotional well-being is part of caring about you as a person. Let me share a contrasting example. Another client, Linda, was dating a man named Michael, who demonstrated what it looks like to prioritize someone's feelings. Linda had arthritis that flared up occasionally, causing her significant pain and fatigue. When she was having a flare-up, she often needed to cancel or modify plans. Instead of getting frustrated or making Linda feel guilty, Michael learned to recognize the signs of an approaching flare-up and would proactively suggest low-impact activities or offer to bring dinner to her place instead of going out. He never made her feel like her health issues were an inconvenience, and he always prioritized her comfort over his preferences for activities. When Linda expressed frustration about her limitations, Michael listened with empathy rather than trying to fix or minimize her feelings. He understood that sometimes she just needed to feel heard and supported, not cheered up or redirected. This is what it looks like when someone prioritizes your feelings. They pay attention to what affects you, they adjust their behavior to support your well-being, and they never make you feel bad for having human emotions and needs. As an older woman, you've earned the right to have your feelings treated with respect and consideration. You've lived long enough to know the difference between someone who cares about your emotional well-being and someone who sees your feelings as obstacles to their convenience. Don't accept being made to feel like your emotions are too much, too sensitive, or too inconvenient. The right person for you will want to understand your feelings and will work to support your emotional well-being, not dismiss or minimize it. Your feelings are valid, they're important, and they deserve to be prioritized. By anyone who claims to care about you, never let anyone convince you otherwise. Ladies, let's quickly recap the 7 warning signs that could save your heart. Number 1. Inconsistent communication that creates uncertainty. Number 2. Avoiding future discussions when conversations turn toward building together. Number 3. Selective vulnerability used strategically rather than for genuine intimacy. Number 4. Keeping you separate from his real life and social world. Number 5. Inconsistent effort that creates hope and disappointment. Cycles. Number 6. Not investing in understanding you, showing little curiosity about your depth. Number 7. Not prioritizing your feelings. Your emotions take back seat to his convenience. If you recognized several patterns in a current relationship, don't judge yourself harshly. We've all been there. Your capacity to love deeply is beautiful. Don't let anyone's inability to reciprocate make you cynical. But remember, you're not asking for too much when you want consistency, consideration, and emotional priority. These are basic requirements for healthy partnership, not unrealistic expectations. You've earned wisdom about your worth. The right man will be excited by your complexity, want to understand your depth, and see your experience as an asset. He'll communicate with intention, include you in his future, be genuinely vulnerable, integrate you into his life, show consistent effort, invest in knowing you, and prioritize your feelings. Don't settle for less. Being alone is better than being with someone who doesn't value you. You deserve love that enhances your life, and you're worthy of someone who sees loving you as a privilege. Trust your intuition, honor your standards, and never forget, you deserve to be cherished.